Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone, and welcome back to my top 5. On today's episode, we're going to be picking up right where we left off on my top 5 AX8 amplifiers with now my top 5 AX8 impulse responses. And for those of you that may not be super familiar, cabinet impulse responses are what replace the speaker cabinet and mic setup when you're recording a guitar in a digital signal chain. If you'd like to learn more, I do have a video on that I will post around here if I do remember to do that. But all you really need to know is that if you're using digital amplifiers like with the AX8, this is what you'll need to make your amplifier sound real and not like a fizzy mess if you left it without it. So just a quick disclosure before I get into talking about these cabinet impulse responses. Number one, I do record them with the same amp throughout this, so you'll be able to hear the differences in a more apples to apples comparison. But when I use IR's recording, I very rarely only use one. A lot of the times I'll do a stereo signal where I record one full pan left, one full pan right, have the same track going into my DAW, and then I'll mix them accordingly to get a little bit of a different flavor of the same amp tone. And I'm not doing that here just so you can hear the individual impulse responses, and with the amp it's paired with, some of them sound really dark, some of them sound really fizzly, but if you use them together and kind of mix and match, then you'll get really good results. So if you think one part sounds really bad, it's not really because it's meant to be used alone. So do keep that in mind. And let's get on with this. I want to be using my phone for help because there's no way I can remember the names of all of these without it. So let's start. So in numerical order, my first of my top 5 favorite cabinets in the AX8 is the 4x12 German V30. The 4x12 German is based off of an Engel cabinet, and I really have always liked Engel cabinets for some reason. I don't know what it is about their construction, but even when paired with normal speakers that I would use in other cabinet configurations like the Mesa back there, it does sound brighter, a little more crisp in some ways. And I have no idea what microphones or mix, or if it was a single mic, whatever they used to record this signal, but it does sound very similar to a lot of other Engel IRs I've heard in the past. This IR is really good for about any genre. If you're using something that calls for a 4x12, I really like to use it in a mix with 8 strings to kind of brighten up the bottom ends, but you can use it for just about anything. Vintage 30s are probably my favorite speakers out there besides some of the custom stuff that's been done. And you will definitely see that going forward with this video. But great cabinet, great to use on its own or in a mix, and it'll definitely give you some German flavor to your metal tone. The second IR is actually one of the 2 on this list that isn't a vintage 30 speaker. This is the Fractal Great Britain M160. This impulse response is based off of a Marshall cabinet with aftermarket speakers, in this case G12H greenbacks, which are another one of my favorite speakers out there, especially basically anything Celestion makes I would use, but greenbacks and V30s are among my favorite. And this one will give you a little more British sound. Also really like to use this one in a mix with the Engel, get really good 8-string tones out of it. You get a little bit more fizzle mid-range in the V30s, a little bit more mid-bump, lower mid bumps in the Marshall stuff. It sounds really good. This one I believe was using a Barrow dynamic mic, one of the condensers, and sounds really good. I've used it with anything with classic rock amps, heavy metal. You can definitely get a decent sound by itself, but once again I would recommend mixing it with something that's using either another microphone with a Marshall cabinet or another cabinet altogether if you want even more variety. Sounds good with sludge, sounds good with gent, sounds good with about everything. Our third IR is yet another 4x12, spoiler alert, they're all 4x12s because that's what I play through in real life. This one is definitely the weirdest out of the mix. This is the John Petrucci V30 mix. Now, I'll be the first to admit that although I'm a huge fan of John Petrucci's technical skill, I don't really like his tone. I never have, and I think I've figured out a part of why. This impulse response is so dark. He's known for miking his Mesa V30 cabinets, which is actually pretty much the exact model you see sitting behind me, very off-center, which is going to give you that dark, more pronounced mid type sound. And in order to compensate for that, he probably, cranks up the highs and scoops the mids quite a bit on his Mark V amplifier. So I would say there's some funny frequency playing going on there that does contribute to what I think is a kind of a bland sounding hard rock metal tone. If you like it, that's cool. It's just not for me. It's very unpronounced, and you can definitely see why in this impulse response. I would never use this IR on its own, even though it is two mics being blended. I have used it in coordination with another impulse response that is either too bright on its own or does bring out a little bit more of the high end. So if you use something like an SM57 closer to the middle of the speaker and you mix the two, that'll allow you to get the nice bright guitar tone in one side and then the lower mids that are more punchy. And if you mix them correctly, I think that'll give you a really, really nice end result. So this is something that unless you just dial your amp exactly the way John Petrucci does, that I would use in just standalone mix. But it does sound cool. It does give you a different flavor of V30 tones that I would never get out of that half stack. But is cool to play around with, and anything from classic rock on up, I think it can be useful to achieve that very mid heavy mix if you're looking for that. Our fourth IR is an even more classic Marshall sound, and it is the M20B. So this is based off of an older 1960B Marshall cabinet with G12M speakers. This gives you what I think is a more traditional sounding British sound. This works really well for about anything. It's one of those workhorse IRs that I use a lot, whether I'm doing thrash metal, classic rock, can be used even in a mix on 8-string stuff. Very usable. Anything with G12s of any variety to me is very useful for about anything. So I really like it. I'm fairly certain this is an own hammer cabinet. Does have OH, so they do throw you a few of those in there, as well as red wires in the box, which I think is really cool. But another really high quality ultra res cab if you're looking for some classic British tones. And last, certainly not least, this is yet another Mesa V30 cabinet. This is the Mesa 4047E. This IR is that cabinet with a 4047 microphone from Audio-Technica. It's another big diaphragm condenser mic that sounds absolutely fantastic. This IR can sound phenomenal on its own, but it was definitely intended to be mixed with others in the box. So I like pairing this with an SM57 to get rid of some of the sizzliness in the 57s and bring out some more of the brighter tones of the 4047. I have used this to mix with the Petrucci V30s as well, so that would be a 3 mic setup, which would be ridiculous, but it does sound really cool, really full, thick sound if that's what you're looking for. This impulse response is one of my workhorses for about anything halfway modern. Definitely mix it with 8 strings, 6 strings, everything in between. It does sound phenomenal, but I am a bit of a biased source. I do love Mesa V30s, so take that for what you want, but it's a fantastic IR in my opinion, and I would highly recommend you check out all of those in that section of the AX8. There's a SM57, M160, that one, all kinds of stuff. So a lot of good stuff from the Recto cabinets in the box. So that'll do it for this episode of my top 5. As you notice, all of these were 4x12s, and that's because I only use 4x12 sounds. If I dial back to anything like a 2x12, it just doesn't have the same balls that a 4x12 does, in my opinion. So if you're not into that sort of sound, you can always look around, but a lot of the 2x12 stuff does sound noticeably thinner to me, and I just, like I said, I like that 4x12 resonance you get. So do be sure to leave your suggestions and comments down below. This video actually was a suggestion from one of the audience members. I wasn't going to do this one, but it's actually a really good pairing, so thanks for the feedback there, and I thought it turned out to be pretty good. So we'll see you next time, and hope this was helpful. Thanks. Bye.